Fire Emblem is a turn-based strategy game, where mechanical skill does not really influence gameplay to a significant degree. If you know a particular strategy, you can expect to achieve the exact same results as anyone else that uses the strategy. And as a result, replicating most strategies exactly tends to be as easy as following a list of instructions. And this leads us to a problem. With information circulating on the internet, the best strategies get shared and spread instantaneously, meaning that anyone who looks will be able to find and use that knowledge to their advantage. And this is a great thing from an individual perspective. They can use a complicated, well-developed strategy and feel good about pulling it off. They can play well and be good at the game. But the number of strategies that people feel are even worth discussing is surprisingly low, given the diversity of planning that can happen in this game. And this is because better strategies tend to crowd out weaker strategies. In some kind of gamer natural selection, the strategies that require less effort and grant greater rewards will tend to be used and shared more in comparison to weaker strategies. For example, a common response for people asking about advice in Fire Emblem Awakening on limited difficulty is just to use Nosferatu Robin. And the unfortunate part is, they're right. The Nosferatu Robin build is probably the easiest and most consistent way to beat the game, and for people who just want to beat the game, that's great because it will allow them to achieve their goals. But the existence of the centralizing strategy makes all the others almost completely irrelevant just because it's so blatantly superior in almost every way, except for the fact that it's brain-dead and unfun. In this way, Fire Emblem players are often too good at Fire Emblem. They tend to optimize the difficulty and the fun out of the game. Fire Emblem has this strange paradox where the game is about developing better strategies and increasing your odds of victory, but if the strategies are too good and too easy to execute, then victory becomes guaranteed, and the game becomes boring. As time progresses, challenges that could originally be quite difficult are now devalued and less interesting because people have made strategies that are too good. For instance, on my first playthrough of Fire Emblem Engage, which was a continuous 3-day marathon immediately after launch during which I did nothing but play Fire Emblem Engage and sleep, the endgame was quite difficult in part because I was extremely tired, but also because I was playing the game more or less as intended, without much outside knowledge. In particular, chapters 24 and 25 took a lot to get through on my first playthrough, but now I'm aware of various Warp and Astral Storm cheese strategies that can effectively let me skip those maps entirely, making them trivial and not challenging at all. While the struggle I had at launch was interesting to me at the time, the current existence of these objectively superior strategies makes those old plans I had completely obsolete and uninteresting if I tried to do them today. So my point is that the intended path in otherwise easy games can often be reasonably difficult, which is why people formulate strategies to just skip them. Optimization leads people to use exploits, oversights, or workarounds that let them dodge difficulty and make these otherwise difficult games into easy ones. For example, Fire Emblem Sacred Souls is considered to be a generally easy game, even though some maps like Chapter 19 and Chapter 20 have very tough enemies that can cause you trouble. However, both these maps are easily cheesed or skippable in an optimized playthrough, making their challenge basically nothing. While the intended path of Chapter 20 has you fighting over 100 reinforcements, the most common path is just move over the river to kill the boss and seize, avoiding most of the map entirely. Another big example where the likely intended path is typically skipped entirely will be Sombron in Fire Emblem Engage on maddening difficulty. The intended way to defeat the final boss would have you defeat all 12 Dark Emblems, but most people will likely just defeat 4 to break his shield and burst all his HP bars in one turn. And this makes the map significantly easier than just slugging it out, but it's technically a cheese strategy. As such, this boss is often regarded as being quite easy, almost entirely because pretty much everyone uses the cheese strategy. If this cheese didn't exist, then the Sombron fight will be much more difficult, and Fire Emblem Engage will be considered a harder game. Personally, I've beaten the game 3 times, and I'm still never beaten the final boss in the intended way. As such, I think it's surprisingly common for players to basically never try the intended path by the developers, and only use the cheese strategies for higher difficulty games, meaning that they never really realized that at one point some of these maps actually could have been difficult, and this makes some maps that could have been memorable experiences into boring and skippable maps. This obviously is a flaw of game design, but at the same time is also a consequence of how such exploits are so easily communicated and spread and then used. The homogenization of Fire Emblem strategy is inevitable and it isn't going anywhere. You can't put the genie back to the bottle, you can't uncheese a map, you can't undevelop an overpowered strategy. However, I think that in trying to interpret the intended challenge left by the developer and engaging with it directly can make for some very interesting gameplay experiences, Because of online guides, these intended routes are likely much less explored than you might expect. I would encourage you to try playing the game as the developers intended, and I think it can be a surprisingly rewarding experience.